Devin Townsend, PowerNerd, album review. Haven't got a chance to get out and get over the hills like I normally do today because of the darker, I was going to say darker weather, but I suppose it is darker weather, isn't it? It's all just gold and grey and depressing. Figured I'd utilise my lunch break and get something done. So, let's get straight into it. Apparently, Devin set himself a challenge of writing this album within the space of a fortnight. In fact, he actually wrote it within 12 days. And the whole point of it was to not overthink things, as he's quite prone to do. I think a lot of us are prone to do that. I certainly fucking am. That doesn't mean we can't have fun. He explained himself. I feel that I typically have been, and it's not always been a bad thing, but I tend to overthink things a lot. And I get really complicated with things that sometimes, at least right now, I felt like that wasn't what I wanted to do. Did I read that right? So I gave myself parameters for PowerNerd. I gave myself 12 days. Yeah, it was 12 days. There you go. I gave myself 12 days to write it and 1 day to rehearse it. Darby Todd came in from the UK and then 2.5 days to track drums, bass and guitar. And if it was to not work, it would have been a colossal failure. But I'm happy to say it's exceptionally heavy and exceptionally cool. Although initially I think this was supposed to be more of a optimistic kind of party album, it's important to point out that Devin was actually dealing with a hell of a lot of grief during this time period as well. And this took a bit of a toll on him, more than he was expecting, I believe. It's also worth pointing out as well that he's got a ton of other projects that he's still working on. The Moth project that he announced years ago, I think is finally going to see the light of day. I think there's talk of a Casual as a Call 2 album, which would be absolutely awesome. I fucking loved the debut, well, not debut, the original, the first one. Get on with it! So before we get into some of the songs, let's just go through the lineup. So Devin Townsend, of course, Darby Todd on drums, Diego Chejeda on keyboards and synths, Mike Keneally on additional keyboards, John Savoy on additional bass, Amon Kosler on additional vocals, Tanya Gosh on additional vocals, and Jamie Jaster even on additional vocals. Though to be quite honest, I don't think you can actually hear what he does. I think he's on PowerNerd, which is the first song, which we'll get into now. Hey! The album starts out with the title track itself, and Devin defines a PowerNerd as a total fucking badass who through tenacity and perseverance turned what society may deem as a weakness into a superpower. I do like this song a lot. It has a very Motorhead-ish kind of riffs around it, and I really like the message that he's trying to convey with this one. All these things we say to ourselves: time to rise, put that shit on the shelf. All those years spent down in a hole, time for life and rock and roll. I got a bit of a physicist vibe from this one, from Devin's back catalogue. In particular, this one reminded me very much of Namaste, the opening track from that album, which is just as well, because that was one of my favourite tracks from that album. A very fun start indeed. This certainly lacks the tranquil appeal of my hill walks, doesn't it? Now, I will be talking about the heaviness throughout this album because Devin himself describes this as a very heavy album. I'll say right now it isn't. There are definitely heavy moments, but it's not a heavy, in terms of like, heavy. Next track is Falling Apart, and this one puts the brakes on pretty much immediately with the heavy and goes into much more of an introspective, reflective kind of a tone. We get shimmering guitar lines with folky guitars and Tanya Gosh, at least I assume it is, helping out on the vocals. Things, however, do get huge for the choruses, with Devin screaming, "So it's falling apart, where the river goes, and we must go again. Keep the tension under control. You're falling apart." I think this was in reference to a lot of the stuff that was going on around the time of doing this album. Like I said, it was supposed to be just this kind of simple project that only took a couple of weeks, but I believe he was dealing with a lot of stuff mentally during this time, so I guess the lyrics reflect that. One thing you can always rely on Devin for is that you're always going to get these really impassioned vocal performances. He's fantastic for that. This is a very emotionally heavy song that wouldn't have felt out of place on Transcendence, I think. Next up, we get a real fun one, Knuckledragger. This one starts out with some retro 80s sounding game sample noises before going into a very 80s inspired hard rock song. Kind of a Def Leppard vibe to it. I've definitely heard Devin talk about Def Leppard a lot in the past, especially the production of those 80s albums, so I'm sure that is some inspiration for him. The chorus on this one reminded me very much of something that could have featured on the Sky Blue album, more specifically Silent Militia, very similar. There's a very, very funny section during the bridge where Devin is claiming, "I've got balls, I've got big balls," while a saxophone is playing in the background. It's just there are some genuinely funny moments on this album. One thing I'll say right now, it's not as complex as some of his other albums. I was going to go, yeah, we'll get into that towards the end for the conclusion, but there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun moments on this album. Gratitude is up next. This is one of the singles that was released to it, and this one as well could have quite easily appeared on Sky Blue or Transcendence. This one's much more reflective, both lyrically and musically, and I guess Devin's going for more of the positive mindset vibe on this one. You see me on top of the world now. Gratitude. So easy on top of the world. I'm glad it's you. A very positive song with moments of really heavy choruses, but once again that the heaviness is more in that kind of 80s real, sort of pop rock kind of huge chorus type vibe. Although there is a moment towards the end we'll get to. Next up we have Dreams of Light, which is a 55-second ambient acoustic piece. It's more of an interlude really, and this could have quite easily appeared on Ghost. Ubelia is next. Ubelia, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I should do, because he actually says the word in the song. Apparently the word Ubelia is a feminine name of Greek origin that means help or aid. This one starts out with a full-on hard rock riff before putting the brakes on almost immediately. I'll say now, there were a few moments in this on the initial listen. I've listened to this album a ton by this point. There was a few, when I listened to this the first time, I kind of got a bit frustrated because it felt like every time things were getting going, it immediately put the brakes on and get reflective again. I will say the more I've listened to this album, the more I've gotten into it. But this one frustrated me a bit on first listen. Once again, much more reflective territory, and once again, a huge chorus that is just glorious to listen to. Next up, we have Jainism, and this is, I think this was the third, or was it the second single? I'm not sure. This is very typical Devin affair. A lot of this is, actually, to be honest. I was kind of hoping in ways that he would offer something a little more different on this album. A lot of it's very typical Devin Townsend, which is not a bad thing if you're a huge fan of him like I am. But this is very much a typical Devin Townsend sort of song. Then again, having said that, as I've said, the whole point of this album was to just put out music without overthinking things. This was another one I could have imagined on the Transcendence album. The chorus in this one, fucking awesome. All we are is a faded madness. All we are is a place in time. All we have is the faith that it's all going to change. So get me out. I wish I could get out over the hills rather than stuck in my car park of work. Next up, we have Younger Lover, and this is another acoustic-driven song with huge moments interspliced, as a lot of them have been, that trademark Devin Townsend sort of wall of sound. Suitably emotional, however, and the chorus on this one is one of those ones that I kind of felt was, I can imagine this being a great crowd pleaser at a gig, you know what I mean? I can imagine people just singing back this one live. I think it's got that vibe. Next up, we have Glacier, and the chorus on this one reminded me very much of Before We Die. Was it from Sky Blue or from Z2? I think it was Sky Blue. But this one has a fittingly Glacier pace to it. The song goes in and out of acoustic reflective moments with the aforementioned heaviness. And nothing particularly mind-blowing, but another solid Devin Townsend song. Next up we have Goodbye. This was another one on first listen I got a bit frustrated with, because it starts out with this real fucking great riff, and then it puts the brakes on things immediately and goes in this more reflective tone. I found that very frustrating the first time I heard it. We were promised heaviness. Now, I'm not somebody who goes into an album looking for heaviness like that's the only thing there is. Far from it. I listen to a wide variety of music, but the whole point of this album seems to be that it was supposed to be a heavy album. And it felt like every time it's getting to that point, it just kind of puts the brakes on. And I did find that with this song initially. Having said that, once again, the choruses are fantastic and have that real prime era Def Leppard sort of, their 80s era kind of vibe to the choruses. Really glorious. And finally, we have my favourite song on the album, Ruby Quaker. This song is fucking hilarious. This is a real throwback to some of the Americana stuff he did, like Casualties of Cool, but more specifically, this reminds me very much of a song he did called Heat Wave, which was on the bonus disc of Epic Cloud. It's got a real kind of Johnny Cash, just that kind of real, it's a real fun vibe. It starts out real, this is the heaviest song on the album. It starts out really softly, then gets heavier, then goes all out kind of deconstruction, strappy young lad kind of heavy towards the end of it. But it's really, this is basically Basically, this is kind of seems to be him just addressing. Well, basically, it's his love for coffee and how much he just needs coffee to get through life. This is genuinely a fun song. If there's one song that I urge you all to check out, do this one. It's just it's a fun song, and as I said, it goes relentlessly heavy towards the end. There's like black metal elements in it, and it really goes into full-on, heavy production, Devin Townsend deconstruction era, and strapping a lad, and it's a fantastic way to end the album. So there we have it. In terms of a score, this if I'd have done this review having only listened to it once, I was very, very not taken with it initially. I would have given it a 5 out of 10. Probably, I was not happy with it at all. I've listened to this album at least 10 times. I'm not showing off about that. Genuinely gotten better with every single listen. It's definitely in the vein of Addicted or Epic Cloud. It does have that real positive kind of vibe to it, despite what he was going through at the time. And it's a fun album. It really is. It really is a fun album. It does come across. I would just, again, the more I listened to it, the more it got into my head, the more I was just like, oh, okay, I get this now. The moments of heaviness are more, they're heavy in an emotional sense. If you know what to expect from Devin Townsend. I think maybe that's what I was expecting. I was hoping for something maybe a little different. That being said, me wanting something different, there were many times throughout this album I thought the inclusion of Annika von Giersbergen would have been quite nice. There were so many of these songs I could almost just hear Annika stepping in and helping out on, which would have been absolutely fantastic. But who else could put something like this together in 2 weeks? You know what I mean? I do feel like Devin has fallen into this kind of what to expect from him now, which is kind of goes against everything that makes him so good in the first place. I mentioned in my album ranking, there's an album ranking, by the way, if you haven't already listened, if you haven't worked that out. In the album ranking, I was saying how there was a real special period of time when he was doing the quadrilogy albums right up until Casualties of Cool. So around 2009 up to 2014. That era of Devin Townsend was absolutely spectacular because there were so many different variations of things that he did, so many different styles. And I don't know, maybe it'd be kind of nice to see him do that again, just pushing things a bit more. And it's a fun album though, and as I've said, the more I've listened to it, the more I've gotten into it and the more I'm enjoying it. At the moment, it stands probably at around an 8 out of 10. It's certainly not album of the year, but it's an album that I've had a lot of fun in the time that I have been listening to it. It's gotten better with each listen, and the more I get into it, the more it really does flow as an album. That's one thing I will say about it. Listen to this from start to finish, it really does flow well as an album. Next week, I think I'm going to review the new Cure album, or at the very least, I'm going to do an album ranking of all of their stuff and potentially just do that as the review and, feature the new album as well. I know it's not metal, but I like the Cure a lot, and I think there are a lot of metalheads who do appreciate the Cure. So I'm going to do that. This Sunday, also, I'm finally going to be putting out my video for 10 songs I could happily never hear again. I know a lot of you have been enjoying the top 10 stuff, so I'm going to get another one of those out. And they're fun for me to do as well. So keep your eyes out for those videos. They'll be out very soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.